What's up, everyone? Today I'm going to go deep and give you 40 minutes of hiring, training, and culture advice. And this is coming from almost 14 years in high level leadership for a Fortune 30 company, and then continuing to grow for the last 4 years my real estate business. Lots of tactical real estate stuff here, but even if you are a business owner not in the real estate industry, I think you can pick up a few things. So, hope you guys enjoy. I achieved a significant milestone in my business this week. For the first time since I started my business almost 4 years ago, we locked up a deal and I talked to the seller for a grand total of 0 minutes. And I'm approaching 100 real estate deals in my career. And the guy on my team who locked it up had no sales background when I brought him on. He was young, working at Outback as a server. And I want to share with you some of the frameworks I've used for hiring and training, and going from absolutely no sales experience to closing a deal on his own. And then I'll share in the end why I think this is crucially important for every business owner. Who am I? My name is Ryan Rice. I am a full-time real estate investor. I'm approaching 100 deals in my career. I've been doing this for 4 years full-time, and I share as much as I can with you so that you can make more money in your real estate business. I'm going to talk about 5 things. I'm going to talk about hiring, 2, the environment that I placed him in when he onboarded. I'm going to talk about his training and his onboarding. I'm going to talk about his daily ongoing training. And then 5th, I'm going to talk about how we status weekly on his performance. And then stick around for the end. I'm going to give you a bonus. First, hiring. I want to mention, too, when I start, I went through a gamut of sales guys to try and help me in my business. And I think the one that I have now is probably the 4th or maybe the 5th person that's tried to give me a hand. And there were a lot of good, valuable lessons that I learned through the first several that helped me land on who I eventually brought in and who's been with me for almost a year now. And one of the first things I did with this hire, I paid a high ticket headhunter, right? So there was someone I knew within my network that led a high ticket sales team. And I wanted some insight on how he found the best salespeople. And he said, well, instead of me teaching you how to find, why don't I just find the person for you and you can pay me a fee? And at the time I had a lot going on and I said, that sounds great. And so he probably spent maybe like 6 to 8 weeks trying to find the right fit. And what was really challenging about this is it was very early on in my business. And so I wasn't yet equipped to be able to bring on this sales killer. And that took a while for him to find the right person. And so he finally said, yeah, I think I found the right guy, and, I'll turn him over to you so that you can interview him. And the most important thing for me when I brought him on was that he was going to be a match for the values in my business, because the first however many, and not just salespeople, but the first group of people and all the different roles in my business that I brought on, what I learned is regardless of their skill set, regardless how good they were, regardless of their experience, they could have all the experience in the world, but if I brought them on and there was a little bit of a value difference, then it just wasn't the right mesh. And what I found myself after a couple years in business with a variety of different people on my team, we could operate and we were all going after a mission together, but it was like we weren't going about the mission the same way. And I actually remember this at Target. When we hired people, Target would give a framework for hiring based on what their core values were. And they would surround and ask a bunch of questions that would help identify, is this candidate a good match in terms of these core values? And once I applied that to my business and then I applied it to my interview process, that was really helpful. And so, for example, it took me a little bit because the business was so young to define what the core values were for my business. And, even in the beginning, I felt a little silly coming up with core values for my business because maybe it's just me and a couple other people. But what I found is that is when it's most important to define what the core values are. Because as you grow, you're going to bring people in. And if you bring people in with different sets of values, then it's going to make chasing the mission difficult because everyone's going to want to chase the mission in a little bit different of a fashion. And as the business owner, you are the one who defines what your values are. And so one of my core values, for example, in my business is relentless growth. And it took me a while to define that was a core value. It didn't start as one, but as I progressed in my business, if I brought on people that didn't have this mindset of relentless growth, I noticed there was just seemed to be conflict. And so that was one that I added. And so I think that's a quick tip for you that you can apply in your business. Define your core values and then know that they're probably going to evolve as you interview and as you hire and you bring people on, because you're going to learn more about the people that are coming on. And just like I did, you'll have these, oh, well, this person's great, but they're missing something. What are they missing? Oh, they're missing a feeling of relentless growth. And for me, that was really important. And so I defined relentless growth among a couple other core values. And I constructed questions in the interview process that would help me evaluate whether or not the candidate had these core values. And the way that I did that, for example, I don't remember the specific question that I asked around the core value of relentless growth. But maybe I asked something like, hey, tell me about what you're working on personally. And then just be silent. That can mean a lot of different things for a lot of different people. And if you find someone that answers the question with, well, I'm reading this book and I'm really trying to learn this skill and I'm really going after this, I'm getting hung up here a little bit. Like, wow, okay, that person is very much invested in their own growth. Versus the people you ask that question to who maybe aren't as focused on relentless growth, it's going to be pretty clear because either one, they're going to give you some sort of bullshit that you'll be able to identify because they're rambling and will lack detail, or it'll just be very short and concise. And so that was very important to me to establish as I was continuing to bring people on my team, was defining what the core values were and then asking questions that would identify whether or not that candidate espoused those proper core values. And so I interviewed him. He was a hardcore core value match. And I'll talk a little bit more about this as we go through this episode. But something I really loved about this guy, albeit the fact that he had zero sales experience. He was actually a server at Outback when I found him. One thing I noticed as he kept talking about what he was passionate about, what his life was, what his background was, he really identified with relentless growth. And another thing that I noticed is he was extremely coachable. And if you're hiring a salesperson and they're very hungry and they're coachable, regardless of what their experience or what their background is, I would say it's very likely that you're going to be able to train them into something pretty cool as long as you're a good trainer. We'll talk a little bit more about that. So that's how I hired him. That's how I found him. And I think that core value part of the interview process was crucial because still today, he is somebody that I would love to show the world who he is. I would be very proud to have the public see him working on my team because he espouses the exact core values that I like to espouse in my business. And I think that's really cool. The second thing I want to talk about is the environment that I put him in. And so the problem I faced at first when I brought him on is I had the most expensive marketing channel that was bringing in the highest quality leads. And my business is a real estate business. These leads were costing in excess of $800 a lead. And so he would get these leads, but in the beginning, he really wasn't well trained yet. And there was an obstacle because not only were the leads expensive, they weren't super high volume. So it was lower volume, which meant they're essentially worth the most when they come in, because if we don't get them when they come in, if we're not able to close them, then that's a huge loss because they're the highest quality lead. But he was taking them early on when he wasn't super up to speed on his training yet. And I identified this after a few months, and also after hiring a coach, and the coach kind of identifying something that would be helpful. I needed the complete opposite of that. I needed a lead that was cheaper and a lead that would provide some volume so that he could get a very high amount of repetitions. And so I added that separate marketing channel earlier this year. And when we brought on the marketing channel, it was so incredibly helpful because it was a very different avatar of prospect that we would get. And he got so much volume. I mean, we went from getting maybe 15 to 20 really, really high quality leads a month. We didn't stop that marketing channel, so we still were getting those. But now we were getting 4 to 6 lower quality leads per day. And so he just got an incredible amount of practice. And so the environment that I put him in, it was important that we added that marketing channel, because when I brought him in and he wasn't as skilled, the way that he is going to get skilled is I give him a tremendous amount of repetitions. And he wasn't getting those repetitions in the beginning. And because of that, it was a slower grow. And so the business wasn't fit for his type of experience level when I brought him on. And so I knew it was important for me to adjust that. So I brought him on, I corrected the environment. I made sure that the environment was good. And the third thing I want to go into is training and onboarding. I wanted to talk about environment before training and onboarding, because I do think it's important that when we're hiring people, we think about the type of person that we're bringing in, and then what is the environment that's going to be conducive for them. And then, is my business that environment, or do I need to make an adjustment? And so I think before even thinking about training and onboarding, that can be an important part of bringing somebody on. So training and onboarding, this was a really big one for me, and I spent a significant amount of time on training and onboarding from a sales perspective. Part of the reason why I did this is because, again, he was, I think, the 5th person that I had brought on to help me. And every person prior that I had brought on, the training got progressively better, but the very first person, there was literally no training. And then the second person, there might have been a little bit more training, and then it just progressed and progressed. And when I brought him on, I knew that he had such a good potential to be a good fit. And now it was my job to provide him with the tools that he needed to grow him into a potential of who he was able to become. And in order to do that, I need to have some damn good training, or at least put in a significant amount of effort to provide as much training as possible. And so I want to give kind of a high level overview of the training that I provided him. And my training had 12 parts, and I'm going to go through each and every one of them, because if you run a real estate business, I think all of these parts are very, very important. And especially if you're bringing on someone that has great potential, but may not be at the skill level where you need them to perform on day one, and you have to get them to that skill level, I think all 12 of these parts of my training that I built can really, really serve that type of person. And again, sometimes the best salespeople are people, not people that have, 10 years of experience that are already killing it out there, because you're going to bring those guys on and they're going to want to do things their way. It's going to be hard to adapt. And we did this at Target too. I mean, at Target, I ran stores, and we would hire college students fresh out of college and put them in a leadership role where they might have anywhere from 4 to 6 direct reports out of the gate, and as many as 20 to 40 indirect reports out of the gate. And they're 22 years old, and they've never led any sort of large team before. But At Target, if we brought in someone that was a value fit and they were hungry and they were coachable, then we can make it work. And it's the same with a salesperson. And so this worked out well for me. Not only did I get a lot of experience in terms of training a salesperson, but I brought in someone that was hungry and coachable. And the rest, if you have a good training program, you can get them to where you need to go. So the training program itself, the first part of it is sales psychology. And this encompassed stuff like tonality, stuff like the tactic of labeling, how sales is best serving the client, right? Our goal is not to get them to sell their house to us. Our goal is to give them all the information they need so that they can make a good, effective decision. Our goal is to listen to them, not try and tell them everything, all of the little things about our service that we offer to convince them that we're the right thing. So a little bit of sales psychology in the beginning was the first thing. And this was a big module that I created in Google Presentations. I had videos. There was just several different aspects of that helped teach the foundation of good sales psychology. The second part of my training and onboarding was I trained them on our typical seller avatar. And so I think so important. I think a lot of training programs in terms of sales focus on training the salesperson on the product or the service. And I have found it incredibly beneficial to, instead of train them on the product or the service, train them on the type of prospect. And so I went back and I looked at all of our seller avatars that we had over the past several years, and I put together our most common seller avatars, and I created like a whole presentation on what our most common seller avatar was. And it helped him understand the psychology and the type of person that we were interacting with and that we were bringing on a more regular basis. And that was really helpful because he got to know the prospect before he started talking to them. And that way, once he started talking to them, he already knew who they were because we had some good in-depth training on the actual prospect. And that ended up being really helpful. The third thing in terms of training and onboarding was the script and its psychology. And the script for his role, which is a follow-up specialist, was essentially how to qualify a lead. And so not only did we walk through the script in this training, but I explained why we said, this word and why we had this line. And I think it's important that when you're training your sales team, not only are you trying to train adherence to a script, but they have to have a good understanding of why each line is said, because there's always a purpose. And so we went through that, and it was helpful for him to have that foundational knowledge of, why do we say this? Why do we say that? The fourth thing is we went through like a title training. And what I found this helpful is a lot of times, even early on in a seller conversation, a prospect might have questions on how does this work or whatever. And the salesperson could say, I'm not quite sure, but I can make sure I get your questions answered. But I developed a very brief transaction coordinator type of training, which just kind of gave him a brief overview on how the title process works. That way he could have an understanding enough to communicate to the seller anything that was important around that topic. The fifth thing was construction. I knew he was going to be able to have better and more in-depth conversations with sellers if he understood the basic knowledge of construction. And I'll be honest with you, I made this very simple. I went and I found a YouTube video that talks about it throughout the whole video. It shows a time lapse of a piece of dirt and then a home getting built, and it talks about every major component, right? Foundation, concrete, framing, plumbing, electrical, HVAC, so all the way to the end. And I had him watch that as part of his training, and it's like an hour-long video, but you could put it on 2x and get it done in 30 minutes. Just a lot of return on investment, because there were a lot of things from a technical standpoint that he learned that just equipped him to be able to have more quality conversations with the seller. And look, if you're hiring for a follow-up specialist or a setter or a lead manager on your team, and maybe they don't have a desire to progress, or you don't feel they can progress, maybe some of these things aren't as appropriate. But I built this training for someone in the follow-up specialist seat who wants to continue to grow with the company. And having a good foundational knowledge of construction, especially if someone is starting with zero, is just going to help them have better conversations with sellers. Quick interruption. If you're liking what you're hearing and you feel there are other business owners, whether real estate or not, that could benefit from hearing this, please share it. It would mean a lot. That's how this podcast grows. And at the end of the day, if we can create more business owners who can help more people, I think that's how our world gets better. Thanks. The sixth part of this training and onboarding was a basic level ARV training, after repair value training. Made a very quick video, used a subject property, and just showed them how we come up with pricing. That way, again, they have that foundational knowledge and they're that much more equipped to have a better conversation with the seller. Seventh, I had a section on how we present offers. He's not the one who is presenting the offer, but I want them to understand the full scope of the sales process. And so I pulled a recording of me presenting an offer to a seller, and I just had him watch it, and then I gave him buckets on here's the script that we use and here's why we say these things. That way he has an understanding on how that part of the process works. Because if he knows the entire journey of the prospect, he's going to be able to better serve that prospect, because not only does he know where they are right now, but he knows where they're going. Eighth, and this was a big one, I made an entire Google presentation on how to overcome objections or resistance. And early on, the objections and the resistance looks a little bit different than maybe later on in the sales process. But I literally made a slide. I went back and listened to a ton of my sales calls, and I wrote down every single thing that people would say that was an objection or that was a little bit of resistance. And then in each Google slide, I would just write a response, right? And so now he has a reference point for everything that hundreds and hundreds of clients have ever given us, so that he can prepare for those responses and be prepped to best serve the client, because he's already going to have heard it because he's been through that training, right? Ninth, I have what I call how to handle situations. And so the very same thing, I created a separate Google presentation, and we would have clients call in and they'd be like, I've never sold real estate before. What's the difference between selling with a realtor and to an investor? Well, it's important that the person answering the phone knows how to answer that question, right? And so again, I took every possible situation after hundreds and hundreds of sales calls. What do sellers call and what do they say? And then I made a separate Google presentation. And these might not be objections, but they might just be generic questions. Are you a licensed broker? Are you a broker? Do you use a title company? A brand new salesperson may not know how to answer all those questions. And so I literally made a list of all of the possible questions that we've heard from hundreds and hundreds of sales calls, and I wrote out what to say. And now he has a reference point that he can always go back to. And he used it. He would tell me in the beginning, he would have that pulled up when he would talk to sellers, and then when they would ask those questions, he would go pull it up, and then he had some talking points. The 10th part of his training and onboarding is I had him review call recordings. And so I took some of our best call recordings, I had him listen to them, so he had a good framework on how I spoke to sellers. The 11th part of his training, and yes, this is number 11 out of 12. I know this is a lot. And if you're thinking, man, this is a lot of work, yeah, welcome to being a business owner. If you don't put this type of investment into your team, then you will get the proper return, right? You will get whatever return on the investment of the investment that you put in. And so it's important to invest. But the 11th part, I had 20 pages of expectations of that role and the person sitting in that seat, and then why we had those expectations in place. And literally, I would write out an expectation, And then I would put directly under it why we had that expectation. And I found that to be helpful because it gave him context around every single thing that I asked him to do. He knew exactly why, and it was in writing, and he could always go back to reference it if he needed. And then lastly, in 12th, I made a document that I call Check for Understanding. And I essentially went through the first 11 parts of that training, and then I wrote out questions that only he would know the answers to had he not only been through the training, but had he understood. And so it was a way for him to kind of test his learning after he went through his training. And that was a lot, right? Those are all of the parts and the pieces of the training and onboarding that I put him through. And I'm glad that I invested the time I did in that training and onboarding, because I learned the hard way when I first brought on the first few, and it just wasn't good. The fourth part here that I want to talk about is his daily ongoing training that we do. So every single morning at 9:30 in the morning, Monday through Friday, we have a huddle. And on this huddle, we'll do various things, right? We will go over a best sales call, a sales call that he picks out that he thinks was the best that he's had of the week. We'll go over the worst, and we'll listen to the sales call. And the framework that we'll use is he'll identify what did he do well, what could he improve on, and what will he do in the future in order to improve on that. And so in the beginning, I made the mistake of we would listen to a sales call and I would just critique, because I was like, oh, I want you to be perfect. And what I found is it was better for him to review the sales call, for him to call out what went well, for him to call out what could he improve on. And then that way he could focus on the select things that he needed to improve on, which is going to help him improve more quickly. We also do a ton of role play. And so in the beginning of this daily training, what we would do is we would start at the top of the script, right? And he would go and he would say the script. And then I would, okay, stop there. Say that again. Great. Say it again with a little bit different of inflection. Inflect up right there on that word. Good. Okay, good. Do it again. Awesome. Do it again. Okay, great. Do it a third time. All right, awesome. And then we would go on to the next. And we did that for the entire script because I knew it was important that he talks to the seller in the right way. And not only is it the words that you say, but it's the tonality, and the way that we really, really dialed this in is that everyday training. And that was something that was really helpful. And it might sound silly, but for example, when you're calling a cold call lead, the first things you say on a cold call is incredibly important. Not just what you say, but more importantly, how you say it. Because you're calling a stranger, and that stranger, if you're cold calling them because there's data out there that led you to them, that means they're getting more of them. And if you sound like everyone else, they're not going to want to talk to you. They're going to hang up the phone. And this daily training of really dialing in the script and how to say it was really, really helpful because he got really, really good at it. And what I tell Mark is his name, what I tell him every day now is what's great about him is he can do something and then we'll call it out and ask to do it a little bit differently. And then he's able to respond and do it differently on the first try, which is great. So his rate of learning is high. And I think that's a good mark of his intelligence because he has the ability to change his behavior very quickly. So we do the call reviews, we do role plays, we do a lot of objection handling too. And so we'll hop on in the morning and one day I might say, hey, what was your toughest objection this week? And then he'll call out the objection and maybe we'll role play it where he's the client and I'm him. I can show him how I would handle it. And then we'll reverse and I'll have him do it. But we'll constantly hit these objections that he gets. And that way he's practicing over and over on some of his toughest objections. And that's been really helpful. I can't stress enough how important it is for daily ongoing training. And this probably could look a lot differently. What's worked well for me is to have that be the first thing that he does in the morning. And he's a different time zone. So 9:30 for me is 8:30 for him, which works out because once we get off, he can start to call people which I found after 10 a.m. local time is like a good time to start calling people. But that having that be the first touch point every single day, it's a good way for us to have a touch point, have daily practice, but also just kind of get some momentum, kind of get the energy where it needs to be harnessed so that he's then prepped to go talk to people. So that daily ongoing training has been really beneficial. And we still do it to this day, every single day, Monday through Friday. And then lastly is the weekly one-on-ones. And what I really like about the weekly one-on-ones, and a lot of this I was able to pull from Target because Target was huge on constant performance feedback and constant performance check-ins. But this weekly one-on-one, we have a one-on-one template that he'll fill out. And on this template, he has put together his most important KPIs that he'll review. And so he essentially looks at all of his data for the last week and then presents his data. And then he presents what he thinks he could have done better. He presents what he thinks went well. And we talk about, where does he want to go and where is he now? And so it's this great, throughout the week, we're constantly hitting on micro. We're constantly training. We're constantly talking to clients. It's go, go, go. This one time per week where we're able to stop and kind of pull back and look at macro. Where is he now? Where is he going? What data points is he currently delivering on? How can we continue to improve those data points is really beneficial. And so we do that again once a week. And that's been a great pull back, look at macro, bigger picture on where he is and where does he want to go and how can we help progress him there. The last thing I want to talk about, and this will be a bonus 6 thing, is culture. And admittedly, this hasn't always been a signature strength of mine. A quick background on me, and I'll share this for context so that if this is you, maybe some of this can resonate with you. But growing up in my career, I've always had a very, very high standard of excellence. And everyone around me, if they were not performing the same standard of excellence, that would be frustrating for me. But I didn't know how to try to teach others that standard of excellence without coming across like a little forceful or maybe a little obtrusive. And learning that skill has been incredibly beneficial. And one thing I've learned about culture is you can change someone's behavior very quickly by punishing them, by making them feel bad about what they're currently doing. That's a very quick way to change someone's behavior. But what I found is when you do that and then you leave or you take yourself out of the equation, the behavior that you're creating is more trained on you. And so if you remove you, then the behavior is different. And also what I learned is if you try to lead from a punishment standpoint or make someone feel bad to change their behavior, eventually the way that you're communicating with that person, they get used to it. And then if you want them to change your behavior, your level of communication has to become even more intense. And so it's like this progression of you have a baseline of intensity, which for me was already pretty intense. And then over time, people be like, oh yeah, that's just Ryan. Ryan's just intense. And then for me to get behavior change, I would have to get even more intense. And then over time, I would be even more intense. And that would happen for a long enough period of time. And everyone would be like, oh yeah, Ryan's just like super crazy intense. He just, he has really high expectations. And what's interesting is that got me really good results in my past. I ran really good stores at Target. We had some really good results. I got promoted a bunch. What I have shifted in terms of how I lead my teams now is much more on a reward-based culture versus a punishment or like an intensity-based culture. And it sounds to me now that I say it, it's like, duh, like, yeah, if you don't punish people, they're going to do what you want them to do more frequently. And it wasn't that I enjoyed that type of leadership. I just didn't know how to do it properly. And now I tactically understand how to lead from a reward-based culture, and I'm able to change my behavior and how I communicate with my team in order to get them to do the behaviors that I want them to do. And what I found with reward-based culture is it's a longer runway. It takes longer to get where it is that you need to go, but it's more sustainable, and it's sustainable without you, because they perform a certain behavior and then you can give them kudos, and then they feel and they see the kudos, and then therefore they want to repeat that behavior over and over. And over time, if you do that long enough, then the behavior is sustainable without you, because you are giving them kudos and they continue to do that behavior. And so it's the complete opposite of the other option, where you remove you in the punishment-based culture, and then they don't know how to behave, or they'll behave how they've always behaved because they associate their behavior with you. Whereas kudos or reward-based culture has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with their specific behavior. And I apply this with my kids. I apply it with my team. And it's something that's worked really well. And so, for example, for him, one thing that we do in regards to this, every single day, he sends an update on his stats. And so we have a communication vehicle, and he'll send a quick update. I made this many dials. I had this many pass-offs. This is my lead management update, and just kind of his bullets, right? And what that gives me the opportunity to do every single day is give him kudos. And I make it a point every time he writes that in, every time he gives the update, I respond to every single one. And so that's another thing. If you're giving your team these tasks so that you can hear an update, it's so important that every time they perform the task, that you reward that behavior, that you give kudos for that behavior, because that's going to encourage the behavior to continue. I've seen a lot of leaders, I saw this a ton at Target, where you want them to do something and then they do it, and then you have the mindset of, well, yeah, you're doing, like, that's the expectation, is that you do it. So I don't need to say thank you, or I don't need to give you kudos, because you're doing what it is that you should be doing. And that's the mentality needs to be flipped on its head, because if that's the behavior that you want to create, if you reward that behavior, then that behavior is going to continue. If you don't reward the behavior, then the behavior is going to stop. And so I wanted to give that little nugget on culture, because it's an important piece that I think has helped develop him into where he is now, is making sure that we have this reward-based culture that is exciting and reinforces the proper behaviors, or the behaviors that I think are going to best serve him and best serve our clients. And so that's it. I wanted to share those details with you, because if I can take someone who has literal zero sales experience, and he's just coachable and hungry, now into being able to close a real estate deal on his own without me, which there's a lot of ins and outs to real estate. It can be kind of complex. There's a lot of different things to understand there. Then I really think anyone can do it. And so if you can have, if you have a good hiring process, and you bring on the right person, and you bring them on to an environment that's conducive to them, and then you have excellent training and onboarding, and then you have excellent daily ongoing training, and then you have really, really good weekly one-on-ones where you constantly are evaluating their status, and then you do all of that within a great culture, then it's kind of neat what happens. So kind of a surreal moment for me, because I put a lot of effort into training, development, onboarding, and my team's culture. And it's really starting to pay off. And I know it's the tip of the iceberg. So if you're a business owner out there, focus your attention on these things, and you're going to see some good outcomes. And when you do, give me some feedback. Drop me a note on Instagram at the Ryan Rice. Let me know what you guys are seeing in terms of your culture and your team. I'd love to hear what's working well, what's not working well, or what you might need help with. So hope you guys enjoyed that. Hope you got some value out of that. And until the next one, I'll see you. Peace.